So the next exercise is the sit-in sleeve with also we will finish the neckline of the this basically bodice with a bias tape. Now I'm going to show you the sit-in sleeve steps, and then I'll do the bias facing later in a different video. The pattern pieces, there are 3 pattern pieces for this exercise: the front pattern piece, the back pattern piece, and the sleeve. This one over here is cut 1 on fold, this one is cut 2, and this one, so the back is cut 2 and the sleeve is cut 1. So you will be attaching one sleeve only, not both of them. Okay, I will be using the notch method to transfer the information from the pattern paper to the fabric. What I need to install a sleeve, I need the shoulder seams sewn and the side seams sewn so that I have a complete armhole to install the sleeve on. So I will start by notching my seams and then attaching the shoulder seam and attaching the side seam so that I have the full bodice of the garment. And then I'll proceed to do what needs to be done to the sleeve so that then I will be able to attach both to each other. So first of all, I need to transfer the information from paper to fabric, so I am using the notching method. So I am going to notch my notches, and again you use the tip of your scissors, and the notch shouldn't be any deeper than half the amount or half the width of the seam allowance. Even if the line is too long, don't notch like the full line, just notch with the tip of your scissors. So 3/16 or a quarter of an inch is more than enough. Okay. Also, I will be notching or snipping the center front for this one, because it's gonna help me with attaching the bias tape later. Right, so I did notch the front. I'll do the same thing with the back. So these are seam allowance notches basically. Notice that there are 2 notches in here. They need to be at the tip, so I will bring a pencil and ruler to move them to the edge of the seam allowance. So with my ruler, I am going to transfer these double notches to the edge of the seam allowance, and then I'll notch them. These double notches indicate that this is the back armhole, and this notch indicates the width of the seam allowance of the shoulder seam, the width of the neckline seam. Okay, and this is the center back seam. Oh, yeah. All right. So I notched everything in here. Again, the back is cut 2. And for the sleeve, you have notches that indicating the amount of seam allowance for the armhole seam and the under seam of the sleeve, and you have double notches to indicate where to attach this to the back. So this is the back armhole of the sleeve. This is the center of the sleeve, and this is the front armhole of the sleeve, and then again these two notches indicate the seam allowance amount. Alright, so I transferred all the information. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to attach the shoulder seam of the front to the shoulder seam of the back, and the side seam of the front to the side seam of the back. So I'll unpin the front. And the front is cut on fold. So I'll open it. Okay, this is the wrong side, and yeah, this is the right side of the fabric. And then I will unpin the back. Okay. And I will take my pieces and align right side to right side, so right side of the back to the right side of the front, and make sure that you have a mirror imaged back piece on top of the front piece. Then I will proceed to aligning my notches at the neck and pinning my pieces together, and at the same time I'll do the same thing at the end of the seam. And I will also pin the other side of the shoulder, matching my notches. I'll do the same thing with the side seam, so matching my notches and pinning the side seams together. And also I'll do the same thing with the other side. So I am matching my curves and my notches and then pinning. Then I'll go to the sewing machine and I will attach the 4 seams, back stitching beginning and end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower my needle and I will wrap my notch around the needle, and I'll use the seam guide on the needle plate, the 1/2 inch seam guide, which is the line right before the fraction half. Okay, and I will again stitch, back stitch, and then I'll stitch all the way to the end and back stitch again. So this is the first seam. I'll pull my thread and move on to the next one. Lower my needle, wrap my notch around my needle, take a couple of stitch, back stitch, remove your pin, and proceed using the stitching guide on the needle plate to stitch at 1/2 inch. Once you get to the other notch, back stitch. Raise your needle, move on to the next one. My pin fell off, so I'll pre-pin again. So I have matched my notches. Lower my needle, wrap my notch around the needle, take a couple of stitches, remove my pin, back stitch, and then sew at 1/2 inch until I get to the other notch and back stitch again. your needle and go to the last seam. Again, I inserted my needle in the notch, basically a couple of stitches, and then I'll continue until I get to the end of this seam. And I backstitched again, and I am done with the 4 seams in one go. Now I'm trimming all the thread. Okay, and again in one go I'll go to the ironing board and I will iron the 4 seams open. Okay, and then I'll come and show you what do I want to do next. In a real garment, you will open the seams and then serge or finish the seam allowances before you attach the sleeve to the garment. I'm going to show you just how to install the sleeve. I'm not going to finish the seams. I just want to show you how to attach the sleeve. Okay, so I'll go to the ironing board and I will iron the 4 seams open and then come back to show you the next step. So now that I pressed the seam allowances open, I have an armhole that I can attach the sleeve to, right, after attaching the shoulder and the side seams of the garment, right? So you have a bodice that's ready for sleeve installment. To prepare the sleeve, I did indicate the notches, and you will see that there are 2 lines between the edge of the pattern piece and the seam line, and within the seam allowance of the armhole of the or the sleeve cap, this area here is called the sleeve cap. So within the seam allowance of the sleeve cap, I need to create 2 lines of stitching using number 4 stitch length, because I need to very gently gather the sleeve cap, because the sleeve cap is actually bigger than the armhole, and that's mild gathering is called easing, and basically I am shrinking the sleeve cap to be accommodated within the smaller armhole, and because I need that extra fabric to allow for the movement of the arm. So now that I transferred my information, the double line of gathering are happening between the single notch of the front of the sleeve and the double notches of the back of the sleeve. Okay, so the single notch indicate the front of the sleeve, and the double notch indicate the back of the sleeve. Okay, so I am going to remove my pins. Okay, and I'll change the stitch length to number 4. Okay, and I will start at the double notches, and I will stitch using the seam guide on the needle plate, the 1/4 inch seam guide, and I will align my edge parallel or touching the 1/4 inch seam guide, and I will sew until I get to the single notch of the front of the sleeve. I'm not going to back stitch because I need the thread free to be able to gather it when I'm done. So here is my single notch of the front, so I should be ending right here. I will hand crank the last 2 stitches. Okay. And once I'm done, I will pull my thread, raise my foot, pull my thread, and I will leave a thread tail of about 2 inches or so. Right, so this is the first line. I need a second line that's parallel to it, and again I will start from the double notches and I will move towards the single notch. I will use the toe of the foot as my guide to sew another line that's parallel to the first one, or also you can use the back line of the number 4 on the needle guide, stitching guide. And I am manipulating my fabric and going very slow so that I am parallel to that first line. And then this is the last stitch. I'll raise my foot, pull my fabric and leave a kind of a thread tail of about 3 inches. Alright, so this is like the preparation of the sleeve. The next step is I am going to put the right sides together of the sleeve, and I will sew on the wrong side. Okay, to attach the under seam of the sleeve. So I'll match my notches together and my edges together, and I'm pinning so that I can take it to the machine and stitch the under seam of the sleeve so that I create the sleeve cylinder. Basically, I will change the stitch length to number 2 again, lower my needle, wrap the notch around the needle, take a couple of stitches, back stitch, remove my pin, and I am using the stitching guide for stitching at 1/2 inch from the edge. Once I get to the end, back stitch, raise my needle, pull my fabric, trim my thread on both sides, and then I'll take it to the ironing board to iron the under seam of the sleeve open. Now you can see that now I have the sleeve cylinder so that I can attach it to my garment. Now that I pressed my seam open, I will turn my sleeve to the right side. Okay, so now it's right side out. Okay, and I am going to hold it as if I'm wearing it. Okay, so you will notice that there is a single notch on one side and double notch on the other side. This means that this is a left side sleeve. Okay, so here is my garment, and I have the right side armhole and the left side of the armhole. I'll bring my sleeve towards the armhole, and I will pin the side seam of the garment to the under seam of the sleeve, okay, from the inside of the garment. and I'll pin it in place. Okay, the next pin will be, I'll look for the single notch of the armhole, and I will pin it to the single notch of the sleeve. So this is my second pin, and I'll do the same thing for the double notches. So I'll align double notches to double notches, and I will pin there. Okay, again I'm looking from the inside of the garment. The next pin will be between the center notch, this notch over here of the sleeve will be pinned to the shoulder of the garment. Okay, now I pinned all the pieces in both all the points in both pieces that are matching in size. What's left is the sleeve to the upper part of the armhole in the back and in the front. And in this case, the sleeve, as you can see, is bigger than the armhole. And that's why I did the gathering stitch. I will use my gathering stitch. You either pull the threads in the front or pull the threads in the back. You can't pull both, because if you do that, it will lock the stitch in place and you won't be able to gather anything. So right now I'm holding the top thread tails for the back part. Okay, and I am going to pull the fabric, and as you can see, it is gathering the fabric, and I'm moving the fabric towards the top of the sleeve cap. All right, and what I'm trying to do right now is I am trying to adjust the length of that cap to the armhole size. All right, don't worry about the gathering that's happening right here, because that's within the seam allowance. The part that's on the inside of the garment is not kind of puckering or doing anything. And now that I adjusted the length and both of them are matching in length, I am going to pin the back in place in preparation for permanently stitching the sleeve to the bodice. One more, and I will do the same thing for the front. So I pinned the back, I'll go to the front, I'll find my top thread, and then I'll pull to shrink the sleeve cap to equalize it basically with the armhole. Okay, and then I'll proceed to bringing the edges together and pinning. To keep the adjustment until I finish attaching the sleeve to the bodice. Okay, all right, and next is the attachment by the machine. So when you start attaching, you will start on the side seam and underarm. Okay, and you will start right before the beginning of the seam allowance of the side seam and the under seam of the garment. Okay, so I'll take it to the machine, try to move the camera so that you can see what I'm doing up close. So again, I will start right before the beginning of the seam allowance, and in this case also I don't need to back stitch. So what I'm going to do is I am going to overlap the stitching. Alright, so I'm starting right before the beginning of the edge of the seam allowance, and I'm using the 1/2 inch stitching guide. I'm aligning my edge with that 1/2 inch stitching guide, and again it's number 2 stitching. This is a permanent stitch, and I'll be removing my pins as I go, and I'll continue stitching until I come back and I'll end at this edge. So there will be an overlap of stitching equivalent to the width of the seam allowances together, so there a total inch. Okay. It's gonna be slow, so take it 1/2 inch at a time basically. Keep your edge touching the 1/2 inch seam guide. Okay. And again we are sewing at 1/2 inch. When you come to the gathered part, you are stitching right next to it at 1/2 inch, so that all the gathering stitch is within the seam allowance. Move your pins as you go, okay? Again, don't worry about this gathering because it is within the seam allowance, it's not in the seam. And when you get to the shoulder seam, make sure that it's that you stitch over it while it's open. Again, I am aligning my edges and stitching at 1/2 inch. And I'm back where I started, and I'm not gonna end there. I'll keep going until I get to the edge of the other seam allowance. Once I take my last stitch, I'll raise my needle and pull my fabric, trim my thread. Now I can trim all that thread, I don't need that anymore. I already attached my sleeve. Okay, so this is the inside of the garment. If I go to the outside of the garment, there are some kind of stray threads. You can trim all of that. Inspect your stitching, make sure that there are no puckers or pleats or anything like that. If there is any area that has puckers or pleats, you can undo just this area and restitch it again. And here is the sleeve attached to the bodice of the garment. I'll zoom out so that you can see how it looks. So this is how you sit in a sleeve to a garment, and when you press the seam allowance, you will press the seam allowances together towards the sleeve cap. So the seam allowances will be pressed together to support basically the sleeve cap. Okay, so they will be pushed in the sleeve. All right, so they will be pushed in the sleeve. And that's it for the sit-in sleeve. And I'll see you in the next one when we will finish the neckline of this garment with bias tape to create what we call a bias facing. All right.